coming to you live, but not really. It is all pomp and no circumstance with Ryder Richards on LetUsThinkAboutIt.com, the amateur hour you should never tune into. Welcome back. This is Ryder Richards with Let Us Think About It, as the intro just said. Okay, so a special shout out to my cousin, Lexa. She is living a great life out in New Mexico, and she's this amazing person who has opted for a life and values outside of the traditional capitalist hamster wheel. And so far, she is also the only other person I've ever bumped into that has read this book. We're going to be talking today about Charles Eisenstein's Sacred Economics. This week, what we're going to do is lay the historical conceptual groundwork of economics, the idea of the gift economy, problems with capitalism, what's up with interest, and of course, a little bit more, some of the psychology behind these things. And next week, we're going to jump into the mechanisms for how to actually change it based off this foundation, right? So riddle me this. Why is money a force for evil in the world? Yeah, right? Why is that? Because I thought money was really just a neutral means of exchange, right? It started off really as an agreement between people. And long ago, of course, it was really about people, not just money. It wasn't an abstracted symbol. It was about relationships. So money in the form of shells and beads, I mean, this was really more like wearing a friendship bracelet, right? These are the kind of IOUs of your friends and family that you could wear. But of course, after Lance Armstrong, I will never again wear a bracelet, right? And that just goes to prove how do all good things, when in contact with money, turn ill. This is super bizarre, right? Now, a lot of people have learned to hide their money. They hoard wealth, and they learn to be altruistic from the shadows, just like Batman.
The hell are you supposed to be?
Yeah, altruism. Right? And they really kind of feel guilty about their wealth. Now, why would that be? Why would you feel guilty about being wealthy? Well, I don't know. They probably looked around and saw that maybe something isn't fair here. Now, this episode and the next episode, they're both going to be taking a look at money and how it moved from the sacred to the profane. How psychology, storytelling, and belief collude. And of course, we're going to look at solutions to transition us from here right now to the more human-centered utopia. And we're going to do this by realigning money with sacred values. So let's get this straight. Money, it isn't necessarily the problem, right? Actually, money is a pretty darn good idea. But it's also merely a tool. And it's like a hammer or something. And I mean, you've all heard this saying about to a man with $1, every problem looks like a vending machine. It goes something like that. Or give a man $1 and he will eat for a day, but give a man $1 million and he will become a smelly rapscallion. Yeah, I think that was out of the Bible, maybe Ephesians or something. I don't know. Anyway, capitalism, on the other hand, this isn't money, right? Capitalism is how we use and grow money. Now, it both is and is not a monster. Really, capitalism is a very easy boogeyman to blame and demonize for things. But then again, we need to think of it this way. If you want to speak the language of money and behavioral economics, it's all about incentives. Now, if you harness capitalism into sacred incentives, rather than the sort of extractive hoarding incentives that exist now, well then money could do the reverse of what it's doing. It could actually keep oil in the ground. It could protect nature. It would keep people innovating for passion rather than just survival. And of course, the commons, which seem to be completely neglected, could exist again in a way that was actually about community and not just markets. Okay, so there's 3 really strong takeaways I received from sacred economics, and I'm going to list them off right quick, okay? First thing is, the earth nurtured us from birth into adolescence. And we currently, as a species, are kind of like unruly teenagers, right? Now, we must transition into being adults. We must be considerate in our relationship with the earth. And not to get too weird on this, but if Mother Nature raised us and we've grown up doing nothing but taking continually from her, from suckling from her, well, where is the reciprocity and all this kind of stuff, right? The recognition, the ability to stand on our own. I mean, we're grown-ups now, still suckling. This is weird, right? And then we throw a fit when the earth cries out in pain. Like, at what point do we mature and give back instead of being selfish? Now, the second thing. The parable of the 11th round. Okay, so this was totally new to me. I never heard of this before, but it's a little story that explains and examines how interest, or usury, ends up working to develop and maintain systems of strife, stress, anxiety, competition, and failure, right? These are all states that isolate us from our natural, connected, generous self. Okay, the third thing I learned, negative interest. Completely new concept to me, right? Now, instead of money accruing value over time through interest, what if it actually lost it? What if money was not eternal, but had a shelf life? Right? What if, just like a bushel of apples, or like a cow or a camel or something, I don't know, what would happen if it lost value as it aged? Now, what if money was actually more like nature, instead of this abstraction that lasted forever, this eternal thing? Now, people wouldn't hoard money because it wouldn't last, so they'd be forced to put it back into circulation. Now, if nature is sacred, and I think it is, and if we actually value it, then we should align money with it by having money function like nature, not outside of nature. That's what leads to all these problems. It leads literally to unnatural behaviors because the tool and the incentives are unnatural. But because we're talking about touchy topics, and these are foundational topics, we're all going to be tempted to argue. There's these knee-jerk reactions. We're going to be tempted to say things like, no, the economic system is just too complex, and if you change one thing, it will have cascading ripple effects. It's the butterfly effect, Ryder, right? Where a butterfly flaps its wings in Japan, and a tsunami ravages a coastline, or maybe it creates global warming. Maybe, is that what's happening? Are butterflies creating global warming? Are they all just farting all the time? Those damn butterfly farts. So anyway, it is both complicated and complex. Eisenstein has 7 interlocking ideas to help us transition from this more dark capitalism, this moment we're in right now, into a more sacred economics. And sure, you can argue all along the way, and you probably should as a good critical thinker, but also just sandbox these ideas. Keep them in your mental playpen for a couple weeks before, they get lost or buried or whatever. And also, you all know my contention. I think that where we're currently at right now, we're on the path to Mad Max Fury Road. Yeah, that's right. So if that's not the future that you want, maybe, flapping your wings a little bit and holding in some farts, that might make it all help to move us into the utopia, right? Or at least a more balanced relationship between economics, man, and nature. So the overall goal of the podcast here for this one and the next one is just to share a path forward, a path that I hadn't known about until I read this book. And that's what's so great, is that now that I can see this path, when people say things to me like, there's no other option, we just have to be greedy leeches until we destroy the world. Yes, I know it sucks, but, we as a species suck, and you can't change sucky human nature. And yet, I just don't know if I believe that. I think we change human nature all the time. I think you're changing right now, right? Just by listening to this podcast. And soon, you're going to end up being a devoted devotee, right? To so many weird ideas that are going to get incepted in through your ear holes. It's going to be great. Totally sacred, dude. Totally sacred. Part 1. The psychology of getting stuck. Now, okay, as we have mentioned repeatedly on the podcast, we create the systems that we now say we cannot free ourselves from. This is crazy, right? But this also reminded me of this new concept I heard about. It's new to me anyway. It's called the tunnel effect. And the tunnel effect is whenever you're stressed, right, you double down on the system and routine you already had in place, which of course likely is the cause of the stress in the first place. So doubling down on a behavior with bad outcomes leads us to believing in lies, right? And that's simply because it's just less scary than jumping into something new. Now, I'm going to link to a research paper on the website about this, but the simplistic version is we get tunnel vision when stressed, and we cease to look around and give other ideas a fair chance. And we just focus down and double down on the thing that we were already doing. So in this way, stress becomes the capitalist prison we cage ourselves in. Now, how do we pull out of this vortex, this spiraling doom, right? We're clinging to a bar of gold as the ship sinks. Well, research says, maybe it doesn't. Maybe I'm just saying this. But the new solution has to be simple and easy. And unfortunately, when you pair this with our stupid human brains thinking things like complexity is profundity, well, it's really hard to convince people of simple things. right? So we have an uphill battle here because people say things like, well, it wouldn't be this complicated unless it needed to be, right? No, not really, right? Because what happens is this is often erroneous, fallacious thinking. And this tunnel effect, it leads to a doubling down on a broken system to solve a broken problem. And of course, this is what great critics of capitalism, guys like Mark Fisher, who wrote Capitalist Realism, and we're going to end up doing a podcast on him at some point because he's awesome. But critics of capitalism have discussed this. Why is the solution to capitalism always more capitalism? Now, I'm going to say that again, right, because it's so important. Why is the solution to capitalism always more capitalism? No, pull this lever. No, turn that dial to 11. Quick, flim-flam that tariff stat. No, wait, hold on. Just a pinch of taxation to taste. Oh, yes, stir it 4 times. Oh, wait. Now lower interest, just a quart nozzle. Yes, that's it, it's working. No, wait, quick. Make another $1 trillion and quick, throw it in this blender. Okay, so why does maintaining capitalism take so much regulation, and why does it also end up sounding more like strange, like astrology or witchcraft than science, right? Because as Eisenstein points out, capitalism's collapse is built into its very design. Tied to usury or interest and extraction, and separating individuals from each other and from nature, well, anyone can see the detrimental effects here. Yet, this is somehow a multi-pronged attack that hijacks our desires through alienation and separation, through insecurity, and on these cascading effects, right? So what we really need to figure out is how all of this worked before capitalism showed up. Part 2, some selective history. Eisenstein says, there's only one thing that isn't sacred today, it's money. And we experience that in our daily lives, just making personal decisions. My impulse is for generosity, or, of course, to follow my passion, or to do something right, even though it takes much longer. Money somehow seems to block these impulses and to reward the things I really don't want to do, the things that are really hurting the planet that might be convenient, or the things that my rational mind calculates will be better for my self-interest. So I don't want to hammer too hard on this, but this rational mind he brings up there at the end, this idea of calculating for self-interest, I think that's really key because it runs also through philosophy, right? The philosophical split of mind-body or mind-soul. And it's this notion that we have separate parts, that we are somehow fragmented, and that somehow rationality and logic are truth, right? And that these are also the more noble pursuits we should be after. And yet, there existed different societies throughout time, specifically indigenous tribes of the Pacific Northwest, that practiced what is called potlatch. Now, potlatch is a reputational gift economy, and Lewis Hyde talks about it in his book, The Gift, which is pretty much required reading. In a potlatch culture, it's not really who would acquire the most large, stupid toys as we do today, but it's more about reputation and honor through gift giving. So, who's the chief of the village? Well, it's the guy wearing all the beads who has given away everything he owns. Wait, you mean the guy with all the respect is the hobo? Well, maybe, sort of, right? But then again, he's never going to need for anything again because everyone owes him so many favors and respects him so much. But even that kind of sounds transactional, and that's just the way our brains work now. But this is not an equation for stability. This is really so deeply embedded in these cultures, the ramifications from this way of thinking are alien to us. We can't even fathom them. Now, in South America, the Piraha, I think that's how you say it, when asked about things like creation, they say, everything is the same, meaning that nothing changes, nothing is created. This is so strange, right? And when asked to project into the future about basics like food storage, for instance, they just won't do it. They say, I store meat in the belly of my brother. Oh, such a great line, right? So Eisenstein in his previous book, Ascent of Humanity, says, I store meat in the belly of my brother. Well, he says that taken literally, it suggests a different conception of self-interest, and therefore a different conception of self. To help another is to help oneself. We are not separate. Okay, so us idiots like that grew up in like capitalist America who can't handle these ideas, and due to bureaucracy, we really need rules where, well, here's some basic rules to the gift economy that I'm just pulling from memory. Okay, if you need something, well, I help you or I give you what you need. I pay it forward. Okay, we don't do binary reciprocation here. If I hand you a chicken, you don't turn around the next day and give me some eggs or a blanket. You pay it forward to a third party. You use your new wealth to be generous to another, and this creates circulation of wealth within the community. Now, the gifts have to be profoundly meaningful. You don't get to just do something dumb like hand me a stick you wiped your butt with, right? That doesn't count. So also, the main rule here, though, is that we have to break the binary. It only works if you have a threesome or a moresome, whatever, I don't care. But basically, it has to be more than just two people handing each other back and forth junk, right? That doesn't help anybody. It doesn't circulate anything to help out the community. So, what you can do, though, is if I do give you something nice, you can give me back a token of gratitude. And this is a friendly thank you, right? That this kind of acknowledges the gift. Now, this exchange, where I've given you something useful and you give me back something as a token, well, this becomes symbolic and sacred. It announces recognition and honor. And the shell on the string that you now have, well, it signifies your commitment to the community. And now finally, this is where the money part comes in, because these were just tokens before of appreciation. These were markers of generosity. So how does it become money? Well, when someone from another tribe swings by and they're looking to trade, right? Well, of course, they're going to go to the most revered person in the tribe, who might be the person wearing the most shells or tokens or coins. Now, the shells speak of trust, stability, and commitment. This person loves and is loved. Now, this is whom you would trade with. This is whom you would make promises with. That's just how it works, right? So let's say, for instance, a little example here. Okay, you need 3 bushels of wheat in the fall, but that wheat only grows in the flatlands. You live in the mountains, but the berries you just plucked in the mountains are going to rot in 2 days. Well, this is a trade that needs to happen over time for 2 non-similar perishables. So if you make a commitment and a promise, right? This is a promise to exchange now your fruits, your labors, for the other tribe's future labors. Well, now we have a vow, and this becomes a sacred exchange. It's a promissory note. It's a kind of a contract between us. And something must be exchanged ritualistically to note the significance. So this might happen to be a useless shell, but that shell is no longer useless. It has now become symbolically meaningful. It has become sacred. And in such ways, money, essentially sacred tokens of promise and trust, they allow us to enrich life through trade with other peoples in other lands. And so far, none of this seems evil, right? Like it was just kind of an innovation on the barter system, because really it isn't evil right now. So we have to ask, well, how did it become evil? Well, as Eisenstein says, if anything isn't sacred, it's money. And the question is why? Because money is just an agreement that gives value to symbols. Part 3. The 11th Round. Eisenstein says, it's said that money, or at least the love of it, is the root of all evil. But why should it be? After all, the purpose of money is, at its most basic, simply to facilitate exchange. In other words, to connect human gifts with human needs. What power, what monstrous perversion has turned money into the opposite, an agent of scarcity? Good question. So to see how we're going to get here, we must first see why we gave away what we now seek. I mean, otherwise we might just fall prey again to it in the future, right? This kind of fallacious subversion and just get stuck in it all over again. So if we once had communion with each other and nature and it was all pretty amazing, well then why and how did we lose it? Well, I mean, that's really a dumb way to phrase it. We didn't lose anything. It was taken, displaced, and subjugated, and we were born into the current system raised by people coerced into insanity and serfdom by the entire world. But originally, there must have been a moment, that the slithering serpent came into the garden. And Eisenstein says, that serpent, that's interest. Usury both generates today's endemic scarcity and drives a world-devouring engine of perpetual growth. Now, to explain this, he uses Bernard Layter's parable of the 11th round.
What we do is, if we need that extra push over the cliff, you know what we do?
Put it up to 11.
11, exactly. 1 louder.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
Once upon a time, in a small village in the outback, people used to barter for all their transactions. On every market day, people walked around with chicken, eggs, ham, bread, right, engaging in familiar negotiations. At key periods of the year, like harvest or whenever someone's barn needed big repairs after a storm, people recalled their tradition of helping each other out. And that's what they brought back from the old country. They knew that if they had a problem someday, others would aid them in return. One market day, a stranger with shiny black shoes and an elegant white hat came by, and he observed the whole process with a sardonic smile. And when he saw one farmer running around to corral the 6 chickens that he wanted to exchange for a big ham, well, he could not refrain from laughing. Ho, 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 poor people, so primitive. Well, of course, the farmer's wife overheard him, and she challenged the stranger. Do you think you can do a better job handling chickens? Chickens? No. But there is a much better way to eliminate all that hassle. Oh yeah? How? Asked the woman. I'll explain the better way. So he took a cowhide, and he got these perfect leather rounds in it, and he put an elaborate and graceful little stamp on each round, and then he gave to each family 10 rounds, and he explained that each round represented the value of 1 chicken. Now you can trade and bargain with the rounds instead of using the unwieldy chickens, he explained. Oh, well, actually, that kind of makes sense, right? Now, everyone is actually impressed with this man in the shiny shoes and his inspiring hat. Oh, what a nice hat. And, oh, by the way, in a year's time, I'm going to come back, and you must each bring me 11 rounds. That 11th round, well, that's a token of appreciation for the technological improvement I have just made possible in your life, for the convenience. But the chicken farmer says, but where will the 11th round come from? You'll see, said the man with a reassuring smile. Okay, so assuming that the population and its annual production remains exactly the same during that next year, well, what do you think has to happen? Remember that 11th round was never created, right? So this now means that everyone is in debt instantly. Therefore, the bottom line, one of each of the 11 families will have to lose all of its rounds. Even if everyone manages their affairs really well, in order to provide the 11th round to the 10 other families, you have to sacrifice one family. This is really crazy. And while, of course, it's much more convenient now to exchange the rounds, the coins, instead of the chickens on market days, the new game had the unintended side effect of discouraging cooperation. Instead, the new money game was generating a systemic undertow of competition among all participants. Now, to continue. The villagers, they gather around the man in the fancy hat, and they say, Sir, could you please give us some additional rounds so that none of us need go bankrupt? The man says, Oh, I will, but only to those who can assure me they will pay me back. I mean, since each round is worth 1 chicken, I'll lend new rounds to the people who have more chicken than the number of rounds they already owe. That way, if they don't pay me back, I'll seize their chickens. Oh, well, and also, because I'm such a nice guy, just altruistic and generous to the core, I'll even create new rounds for the people who don't have additional chickens right now, right? But if they can persuade me that they're going to breed more chickens in the future, well, I mean, just show me your business plan. Show me that you're trustworthy. And of course, there can be another villager who actually helps you create credit reports to help you do that. Well, if you're trustworthy and you have a good business plan, I'll lend you at 10% interest. And if you're a clever breeder, you can increase your flock by 20% per year. And then you get to pay me back my 10% and you get the extra 10% and we're both winning and we're both getting richer. Isn't this great? Well, that sounds okay, but since you're creating the new rounds at 10% interest also, well, there won't be enough to pay you back at the end. There's never going to be enough. Whoa, 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 says the man. You see, when that time arrives, I will have created even more rounds. And then, when those come due, I'll create yet more. I will always be willing to lend new rounds into existence. Of course, you'll have to produce more chickens, but as long as you keep increasing the chicken production forever, there will never be a problem. So, of course, a child comes up to him at some point and says, Excuse me, sir, my family is sick and we don't have enough rounds to buy food. Can you issue some new rounds to me? I'm sorry, says the man, but I cannot do that. You see, I only create rounds for those who are going to pay me back. Yeah, right, so what happened to all that generosity and altruism? And here is where it gets even more insidious, because of course, despite the harm to people, the production of the village does, of course, go up, and then we get to see the ramifications. With a few unfortunate exceptions, the system worked fine for a while. The villagers grew their flocks fast enough to cover the interest. Some, for whatever reason, the ill fortune or ineptitude, did indeed go bankrupt, and their more fortunate, more efficient neighbors took over their farms and hired them as laborers. Now overall, the flocks grew at 10% a year, along with the overall money supply. The man in the shiny shoes and hat was joined by many others like him, all busily cutting out new rounds and issuing them to anyone with a good plan to breed more chickens. Now from time to time, problems arose. For one, it became apparent that no one really needed all those chickens. "We're getting sick of eggs," people complained. "Every room in the house now has a feather bed," complained the housewives. In order to keep consumption of chicken products growing, the villagers invented all kinds of devices. It became fashionable to buy new feather mattresses every month, and bigger houses to keep them in. Pretty soon you had to have yards and yards full of chickens. Disputes arose with other villages and ended up being settled with huge egg-throwing battles. "We must create more demand for more chickens," shouted the mayor, who is of course the brother-in-law of the man in the hat. "That way we will all continue to grow rich." And yet all this overproduction, right, to fulfill a nonsensical demand, well, this has to be extracted from somewhere. And this is where we enter in with Mother Nature's abuse. Whereas the fields around the village had once been green and fertile, they were now brown and foul. All the vegetation had been stripped away to plant grain just to feed the chickens. The ponds and streams, once full of fish, were now cesspools of stinking manure. The villagers said, "This has to stop. If we keep expanding our flocks, we will soon drown in chicken shit." Of course, the man in the hat, he pulls her aside, really reassuring tones, says, "Don't worry, there is another village down the road with plenty of fertile fields. The men of our village are planning to farm out chicken farming production to them. And if they don't agree, well, we outnumber them anyway. So, you can't be serious about ending growth. I mean, how would your neighbors pay off their debts? You are trustworthy people, are you not?" And so, one by one, all the villages turned into stinking cesspools, surrounded by enormous flocks of chickens no one needed or wanted. And the villages fought each other for the few remaining green spaces it could support more than a few years of growth. Yet despite all their best efforts to maintain growth, its pace began to slow. As growth slowed, debt began to rise in proportion to income. Many went bankrupt, and they had to work subsistence wages for employers, who themselves could barely meet their obligations to the man in the hat. There were soon fewer and fewer people who could afford to buy chicken products because they weren't making enough money, making it even harder to maintain and demand growth. Amid an environmental wrecking superabundance of chickens, more and more people barely had enough on which to live, leading to the paradox of scarcity amidst abundance. And that is where things stand today. Part 4. We know there must be a better way, but perhaps it's going to take sacrifice from us. I mean, but really, what would we be sacrificing? Artificial demand for artificial happiness? I'm not even talking about security or comfort here. I'm talking about luxury and frivolity. But even then, we're not really sacrificing. What's really happening is an exchange, not monetary, but an exchange of values. So why do I need all these trinkets and gadgets and more money, right? Well, it's probably because I'm alone. I'm in competition with my neighbors. And I somehow, for recognition, need to signal my wealth hoard, right? For a type of affirmation. My stability comes at the cost of somebody else. Of course, we just don't have to see them from our penthouse or gated communities. And yet we're still not stable. We're still not secure, and we're not whole. No one is. And right now we're exchanging nature and stability for trinkets that will, of course, always be irrelevant tomorrow. They are designed to lose value. This is planned obsolescence. Now, we're on the hedonic treadmill. This is the dopamine hamster wheel, right? Where we're working for placebos and we're chasing cardboard carrots. To transition out of our insecure, separate state, we need to remember the earlier psychology from part 1, right? This tunnel effect. Where we're under scarcity and stress, when we're insecure, alone, and frantic, we tend to double down into the existing system. It's like the acid trip tunnel in Willy Wonka.
There's no earthly way of knowing
He's singing.
which direction we are going.
We attempt to solve capitalism with more capitalism. Now, how do we escape the tunnel? The solution must be simple. Otherwise, scurrying around in fear, our adrenalized amygdala, right, our brain gets hijacked and we can't process the solution. We have to make the escape easy and simple. So we have to be able to see all the pieces and how they interlock, and then deliver a story. Stories work, right? It's a new world narrative with new attitudes and new practices. The age of separation is done. It's collapsing. We must enter the age of ascent. Next week, we're going to start looking at the interlocking pieces, the mechanisms to transition us out of accumulation, out of precarity and insecurity, out of being children, into being responsible adults. And shocker, right? It doesn't mean you have to get rid of money, right? Or become a communist. I mean, Eisenstein says things like, quote, money doesn't have to be the enemy of art, of love, of beauty. It can empower those things. But equally, let's not go too soft on this, right? It's not just our attitude towards money that needs to be shifted, as some self-gurus might claim. Quote, within our current money system, our aspirations to create community, ecological health, social justice, and abundance for all faces an upstream battle. And next week, we're going to begin the battle. Oh, yeah. Thank you very much for tuning in. I highly recommend Sacred Economics. Okay, so if you're interested, I'm going to try to put a link on the website, letusthinkaboutit.com, or you can go to ryderrichards.com and just click the podcast link, and that'll get you there. But I'll try to link to the free version of Sacred Economics. Of course, naturally, I'm holding the capitalist pig version, which is the version that I got because I didn't even think to look for this kind of knowledge for free. I'm just, oh man, so indoctrinated. Anyway, another thing. I have started a little side project. It is bellybuttonlint.blog. Bellybuttonlint.blog. And it's a little wad of navel-gazing reflection that I publish every day. And right now you can subscribe and get notification for these little wads of wisdom. But also I've started posting them to Twitter at Richards_Ryder, and you can follow me on there. But I kind of suck at Twitter. So anyway, follow me. Teach me how it works. I don't know. One more thing, I was thinking about releasing some longer form articles on various topics that are covered throughout the podcast. This might be covering things like the tunnel effect, which we just talked about today. Now, if you're interested in some concepts in written form, just let me know through Ryder at letusthinkaboutit.com. Just sort of want to see and fill out who would be interested in these things before I sink a lot of time and energy into it. All right, thanks a bunch. Until next time, stay safe.